Hi class, our video lesson yesterday was using trigonometry to find side lengths. So today is a similar process. We're going to be using trigonometry, but this time we're going to use it to find angle measures instead of side lengths. So we got to talk about an important concept first, and it is if we have the sine of an angle equals 4/5, how do we find that angle? So in math, whenever we solve for something, we kind of do the inverse operation. If we have 3x equals 12 to solve, we do the opposite of multiplication, we divide. Okay, so we divide. If I have x plus 3 equals 12, I do the inverse operation. Instead of adding, I subtract from both sides. So math is kind of all about, when you solve equations, is to do the inverse operation. So what is the inverse of the sine? Like, I want to find angle A, so I got to get rid of the sine. So the opposite of the sine is what's called the inverse sine. And it looks like this. A equals the sine to the -1. It's read as the inverse sine of 4/5. So that's how we can find angle A. It's the inverse sine of 4/5. So in your calculator, we have sine, cosine, tangent, and we have sine to the -1. That's inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent right there. So you press second sine, second cosine, or second tangent. So our first one is the inverse sine of 4/5. So second sine of 4 divided by 5. Close parentheses. And angle A is 53.13 degrees. 53.13 degrees. So we're going to do the exact same thing here to find angle B. We're going to get rid of the cosine, and the way you get rid of the cosine is you take the inverse cosine. So B is the inverse cosine of 4/7. We put that in our calculator by pressing second cosine of 4 divided by 7. The inverse cosine of 4/7 is 55.15 degrees. Angle B equals 55.15 degrees. You guys pause the video, please, and try to do angle C all on your own. After you tried this, you did the inverse tangent of 4/3, and when you did that, you got 53.13 degrees. All right, so let's talk about how that helps us. Here, we want to find the measure of the two acute angles. In every right triangle, one of the angles is 90. The two other angles are acute angles because they have to add up to equal 90. So angle T and angle W are complementary because they add up to equal 90 degrees. So let's find the measures of those two acute angles. We'll start off with angle T. So to find angle T, if I circle angle T, because angle T is kind of acting like the sun, everything is revolving around the sun. So 3 in relationship to T is opposite. 8 in relationship to T is the hypotenuse. So I ask myself the question, TOA, which trig function uses the opposite and the hypotenuse? Opposite and hypotenuse is the sine function, isn't it? So the sine of the angle that I'm talking about, in this case, the sine of angle T, that equals opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of T equals 3/8. So how many degrees is angle T? Well, it's the inverse sine of 3/8. If I want to get rid of this sine right here, I got to do the inverse to both sides. So the inverse sine of 3/8. So I go in my calculator. Second sine of 3/8. And I get, that angle is 22.02 degrees. 22.02 degrees. Angle T equals 22.02 degrees. Let's do the same thing here for angle W. Angle W, if angle W is what we're focusing on right now, everything is revolving around angle W, this 3 now becomes the adjacent side, doesn't it? Because the opposite side is way over here. So now I'm asking myself, which trig function uses adjacent and hypotenuse? Now I'm talking about the cosine, aren't I? Cosine uses adjacent and hypotenuse. So I say the cosine of the angle that we're talking about, the angle we're talking about is angle W. The cosine of W equals adjacent 3 over the hypotenuse of 8. So how do we find angle W? We take the inverse, of course, right? It's the inverse cosine of 3/8. Let's do that in our calculator. The inverse cosine of 3/8. Second cosine 3/8 is 67.98. 67.98. W equals 67.98 degrees. I want you to notice something, and I want you to notice something that is simply awesome. If this one is 22.02, and this one is 67.98, and earlier we said these two should be supplementary. Are they we said they should be complementary. Are they complementary? The answer is yes. Isn't that amazing? If you take 22.02 and add it to 67.98, you should get 90 degrees, because 90 plus 90 is 180, and there's 180 degrees in a triangle. It all makes sense, and it's awesome. So that's how you find angle measures, is you see the relationship with the angle, with the opposite adjacent hypotenuse, choose the right trig function, and then you have to do the inverse of that trig function to find the angle. Let's do this 3 more times, shall we? Here we go. What is the measure of angle R? This one says to the nearest degree. So I circle R. Everything is now revolving around angle R. So 7, you are my adjacent side. 48, you're opposite the 90, so you are my hypotenuse side. So I'm saying, what trig function uses adjacent and hypotenuse? So, ka, toa. Aha, I know which one it is. Adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So the cosine of angle R equals adjacent 7 over hypotenuse 48. So to simply solve for angle R, cosine, I got to get rid of you. So the way you get rid of the cosine is you do the inverse cosine of 7/48. We do that in our calculator. Second cosine of 7 over 48. The inverse cosine of 7/48 is 81.6 degrees, or to the nearest degree, 82 degrees. R equals 82 degrees. Right here. Let's try the next one. Which trig function are we using on this one? Well, if we want to find the measure of angle C, we're going to say that 12 is opposite of you, and 7 is adjacent to you. So which trig function are we going to use with the opposite and adjacent? The tangent equals opposite over adjacent, doesn't it? So let's use the tangent. The tangent of the angle that we're talking about is angle C. That equals opposite, 12 over adjacent, 7. So then in your calculator, to find C, you're going to do the inverse tangent of 12/7. And when you did the inverse tangent of 12/7 in your calculator, you got 59.74 degrees. 59.74 degrees, or 60 degrees when you round to the nearest degree. Last one. Why don't you guys pause the video and why don't you try this one on your own? You circled X when you tried this on your own, and you said opposite and hypotenuse is the sine function. So you use the sine of angle X equals 10/21. And then you took the inverse sine of 10/21 in your calculator, and you got 28.44 degrees. So that's what you should have got when you did that on your own. Hopefully that lesson made sense. It's very similar to finding side lengths. When we want to find a side length, we use sine, cosine, tangent. When we want to find an angle, we use inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent. We'll do more work on that when you get to class tomorrow.